The day I throttled the emergency engine through the crossing, Karen stood frozen on the tracks, her massive RV angled sideways like a barricade between arrogance and destiny. The horn screamed, metal roared, and for the first time in my life I didn't stop for stupidity. When the smoke cleared, her face was pale, trembling, realizing too late that the world wasn't going to bend to her rules anymore. It all started a week earlier when I moved back into my grandfather's old place near the foothills. The valley still smelled of pine and diesel, and the old railroad tracks sliced right through it like a heartbeat. I'd grown up here listening to the rumble of trains in the night. But a lot had changed since Grandpa's time. The place had been swallowed by an HOA Harmony Valley Association, though the locals called it Hell on Asphalt. And its queen, Karen Bellman, a woman who ruled with a clipboard, a megaphone, and the kind of entitlement that could choke a cactus. She introduced herself the morning after I moved in, tapping her pen against my mailbox like she was delivering a verdict. "Your fence," she said, "doesn't meet HOA aesthetic standards. Also, that paint color too rustic." I told her the fence had been there since the 60s, and that I worked maintenance for the railway that ran right behind her house. Her smile twitched like a glitch in a robot's face. "Well," she said, "we'll have to do something about that noise." That night I found 3 violation notices taped to my door. Noise pollution, unapproved vehicle parking, and something called aesthetic disruption. I thought it was a joke until I realized she'd printed copies for everyone in the neighborhood with my name underlined in red. I laughed, but deep down I knew what kind of woman I was dealing with. The next morning I heard engines idling near the crossing. When I stepped outside, I saw Karen and her little board members putting up cones and a wooden barricade that read, "Private access, HOA approved." I honestly thought they were filming a parody commercial. But no, she was dead serious. She was blocking a state-owned railway crossing because she claimed it disrupted the community's harmony. I tried explaining politely at first. The right-of-way documents, state authorization, safety codes, none of it mattered. She snatched the papers out of my hand, called them obsolete, and told me the board would vote to restrict train access entirely. I said she couldn't block a federal emergency route. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Watch me." That's when I realized this wasn't just about rules, it was about power. And Karen would rather burn the valley down than admit she was wrong. By day 3, she'd escalated. Every morning when the evacuation train passed, she'd stand by the tracks with her group of clipboard disciples holding signs like "Noise-Free Community" and "Trains Kill Tranquility." She even called the sheriff, claiming I was illegally operating heavy machinery. The deputy took one look at my railway badge, sighed, and told me, maybe just give her space before she burns down her own office. I thought it would die down. I was wrong. The next morning her RV was parked right across the tracks, 40 feet of shiny white arrogance, complete with string lights and a community peace fair banner flapping in the breeze. I told her to move it. She smiled and said, "You can go around." I said, "This is an emergency route." And she replied, "I am the fine." That's when I started recording everything. Every word, every threat, every fake citation. I sent the videos to the state safety office. They said they'd look into it. But government paperwork moves slower than HOA gossip. Then came the fire. A controlled burn north of town jumped containment. The evacuation line was activated 2 hours to move people before smoke swallowed the roads. I drove the emergency engine down the hill, praying that Karen had somehow come to her senses. Of course she hadn't. She was there again, her RV chained to a post she'd installed herself, tables and lemonade stands set up for her peace fair. Kids were painting "Quiet Homes Save Lives" signs, while the hills behind them filled with black smoke. I shouted for her to move the RV. She laughed and said, "You're bluffing. HOA calendar says no trains today." My radio crackled ignition, spreading to the canyon ridge. That was all I needed to hear. I climbed into the cab, flipped the ignition, and felt the engine shake the ground like a living beast. I laid on the horn once, long and deafening. The RV rattled. People screamed. But Karen. She stood there, phone in hand, recording. So I did what my gut told me. I moved forward, slowly, deliberately. The crowd scattered. She fumbled for her keys, trying to unhook the chain. Too late. The horn screamed again, and the engine pushed the RV just enough to snap the chain, the tires screeching as metal kissed metal. Karen fell backward, dust covering her once perfect hair. I stopped the engine, radioed dispatch crossing clear, proceed with evac. When the train rolled through, families waved from the windows. Karen just stood there shaking her RV half in the ditch, her phone slipping from her hands. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked human, small, defeated. I told her quietly, "You just blocked an emergency evacuation. Congratulations. You're on every camera in the county." By morning, the clip was everywhere. Over 100,000 views. Local news called it a minor obstruction. The internet called it karma on wheels. The thumbnail showed me in the cab and Karen mid-scream, clipboard clutched like a useless shield. I figured she'd hide in shame. I underestimated her. By noon, she was back outside, sunglasses on, handing out flyers, accusing me of reckless endangerment and abuse of federal property. My neighbor Frank, a retired mechanic, handed me one of her flyers and said, "Buddy, she's coming for you." I asked him why nobody ever stood up to her. He just shrugged. "She's got connections. Scares people with legal mumbo-jumbo no one understands." So I decided to hit her where she lived, paperwork. I dug into the HOA's public records, financial filings, meeting minutes. And what do you know? There it was, tens of thousands of dollars allocated for beautification projects that didn't exist. All funneled into a landscaping company owned by her cousin. I printed every document, every receipt, and sent it straight to my friend at the county office. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down, trespassing on my property at night, taking photos of my porch, even filing a new safety violation against me for operating a locomotive during quiet hours. I laughed so hard I spilled my coffee. But inside I was starting to crack. Every day felt like walking on eggshells. She'd poisoned the whole neighborhood against me, or at least made them too afraid to talk. One night I sat alone on the porch, staring at the tracks, wondering if maybe I should just move. Was it worth it? Was I becoming the problem? That thought haunted me, until the next morning. A letter from the county arrived. The audit was official. Karen was under investigation for misuse of HOA funds. That single piece of paper pulled me out of the hole I'd fallen into. I wasn't crazy. She was. And I wasn't done yet. The next week we held the HOA general meeting. The room was packed, neighbors whispering, phones ready to record. Karen stood up front, wearing her signature beige suit, hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She started her speech long, smug, dripping with fake concern about community safety. Every word was aimed at me. When she finished, I asked for permission to speak. She hesitated. She could smell the trap, but she couldn't refuse in front of witnesses. I walked to the front, placed a folder on the table, and said calmly, "I'd like to discuss the missing $30,000 from the HOA Beautification Fund." The room went silent. I slid a printed statement across the table. "This payment," I said, "went to a company owned by your cousin, the one that was supposed to install the new community signs. Funny thing, though, no signs were ever installed." Her smile vanished. Frank shouted from the back, "He's got the receipts." "Karen." The room erupted. People were filming, whispering. Karen slammed her clipboard down, yelling, "This meeting is out of order." I said, "No, Karen, you are." Then I told everyone about the audit. The county inspector stood up and confirmed it. Her face drained of color. Lydia, another neighbor, stood and shouted, "You fined me for flowers that weren't on the list. You stole our money." That room turned into an avalanche. Every resident had a story, and every story was a nail in Karen's coffin. The board voted to suspend her pending the audit results. She stormed out, shaking, screaming something about defamation. That night I found my fence slashed open and a note scrawled in red ink. "You'll regret crossing me." It wasn't a threat anymore, it was a promise. A few days later, someone vandalized the signal box near the tracks, spray painting, "Stop the engine menace" across it. The sheriff came out himself and said quietly, "She's slipping into criminal territory." Then came the fire. A small one, but enough to leave scorch marks near the tracks. They found a gas can nearby. Her fingerprints were on it. When they arrested her, she didn't fight. She didn't cry. She just stared straight ahead, lips tight, eyes hollow. The neighborhood cheered. The news ran headlines about her arrest and the HOA corruption scandal. For a while, things felt normal again, until the letters started. Notes slipped under doors, spikes left in front yards, messages cut from magazines that read, "She'll be back." The sheriff said it was probably some kids. I didn't believe that for a second. A week later, someone rammed a truck into my gate and vanished. It belonged to Dean Walker Karen's old enforcer, the muscle who used to deliver her fines. They caught him 2 days later babbling about how she told me to protect the order. But the worst came during the storm. Lightning split the sky and the signal lights started blinking erratically. I ran out, rain hitting like knives. That's when I saw a steel beam laid across the tracks. It wasn't random. It was meant to derail the next train. The horn echoed in the distance. I yanked the emergency lever, forcing the barriers down, red lights flashing wildly. The ground shook. The engine screamed to a halt just feet from the beam sparks lighting up the rain. The deputies found the same tire tracks as Dean's truck, and they found something worse, a blueprint of the evacuation engine with the words, "Cut here," marked on the brake line. Turns out Karen's former vice president, Robert Miles, had been hiding in an abandoned warehouse building small explosives from signal parts. When they caught him, he just whispered, "She told me to keep the light alive." The HOA had turned into a cult. By the time the sun rose again, the state had dissolved the association completely. Accounts frozen, leadership banned. The neighborhood breathed for the first time in years. Kids played in the yards. People smiled again. I didn't celebrate. I just stood by the tracks watching the first train of the morning roll through its horn, echoing clean and pure through the valley. I thought about Karen sitting in her cell somewhere, probably still convinced she was right, that her rules kept the world in order. But order without empathy isn't order, it's tyranny. The train passed and the rails sang with the sound of motion of life moving forward. And I realized something: you can't reason with people who build fences around reality. Sometimes you have to drive straight through them.